All right, and welcome back to Better Understanding the Bible. We're here for another fun discussion, joined again by Mercy. Hello, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me again. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, we're going to actually continue into Adam only conversation. What is Adam only talking about? Well, and to get into that, first of all, I want to say it's with playfulness that we say Adam only, because at the heart of it, truly what we're talking about is Bible literacy. So
Mhm.
I'm going to say this just like when I first went through preterism. When I went from futurism to partial preterism, which took very, very, very little convincing, and then I stayed in partial preterism for a while, I changed that because it was more truthful. But then when I was in partial preterism for a bit, it was like, okay, you become comfortable. And then the internet came to be, and you're like, oh, what is this full preterism? And within a month, I was in a full preterism because it was more truth. But it wasn't that it was because preterism was right. It wasn't because partial preterism was right. It was because it was better understanding of the Bible. It
Yes,
was just,
being closer to what the Bible was saying. That was my journey as well. I was historist for 3 years, was studying through that. And then it was like, wait a minute, I see the connection here with 70 AD. And what was that? And then when that started to open, full preterism, that's what the Bible was saying. And so that's why I love your channel, Better Understanding the Bible. Are we trying to go towards a certain view? No, we're trying to get as closest to the Bible as possible. Why? Because we value the Bible. There's legitimacy in the Bible, it's real history, and there's a great message there. So the closer we get to the biblical text is really the goal here. It's not about different perspectives or this line of doctrine or that. It has nothing to do with that. We want to equip people. What does the Bible say? As it is. There's no agenda here. What is it saying? Let it speak to us.
and that's the whole crux of it. Like when we're getting into preterism, is it that preterism has a better view? No, there's no view. It's is that doctrinal way of looking at things? Is that perspective bringing clarity to these issues, or is it not? It's not an opinion. It's coming to grips with what is the Bible accurately trying to detail for us. And so preterism is a much better way of reading the Bible. Why? Because it's more accurately reflecting what the script is saying. And so when we take a look at the idea of Adam only, fun terminologies aside, all these kind of things, the reality is we're just focusing on more clarity to the reality of what is the message of the Bible and what's it saying. So,
Mhm.
whatever we want to call this view that we're seeing unfold before us, that we're seeing coming through lots of research and time, call it whatever you will. Uh, if I was to summarize it, the reason why I call it Adam only is because Adam only is referring to the story of the land of Mesopotamia. Adam was the first covenant head that was put over it. And we're going again through the Hebrew claim. So the Hebrew claim is that the first covenant head over the land of Mesopotamia was Adam. So that's all that. That's Adam only. Why? It was because Adam's descendants were the ones that ran the show. That's what the story and narrative is. So it was Adam only over the body of Mesopotamia. Adam was the head, the body was Mesopotamia. So we're talking about the story of Adam only, which is the story of the land of Mesopotamia from their coming into civilization to the end of their age of empires when Jesus died, and the transition into a whole new world came, a new age, if you will, sprung up all around the Middle East. And so we're seeing that's the transitional story of that time and that period. So it's not, I just want to clarify, this isn't a new magic view. It's not saying there's a structure or anything yet, but there is a reality that these answers are answering themselves. Just like when you move into full preterism, you go, oh, well, what about this? Oh, these things. Well, what about this? Oh, these things. Oh, what about this? Okay, fine. I'm a full preterist now. It's through that evidence, it's through that searching and coming to. And that's what this is. Adam only just simply represents, if I were to say it, it's honoring, and I wrote it down so I could say it right. So it's honoring the audience relevancy of those who received the book and how they would have lived under it. So it's not so much looking at the historical accuracy or trying to make sure that every dot and every tittle was fulfilled. It's not looking at it like that. It's trying to understand it with in the time period is 1500 BC to 1400 BC, however we want to put it, where Moses leads Israel out. But 3 to 4 generations later, these people are now living under this law system. Their entire nation's governed by it. Their history is based on it, and their future is already told for how they are to act in it. So, as far as they're concerned, how did they perceive the Bible? How did their leaders tell them to perceive the Bible? So we're not really necessarily trying to get into these ridiculous particulars, which I think there's value to. I'm not going to say we shouldn't look at those very big details, but what I'm trying to do is pull together what was the whole message being said in the Bible. And if I was one of those people living under the Bible at that time, how would I see it? How would I relate to it? So it's very heavy audience relevancy, but actually, if we could transport our eyes back in time into the heads of a Hebrew 3 or 4 generations removed from Egypt, how did they perceive the words in the Bible? That's what Adam only, this view that we're kind of coming to, is that's the focus. It's not so much to proclaim a new view as much as it is to better understand, come to the truth of what the message behind the text is. Just like we all went into preterism and full preterism, moving into a covenant creation view, then we're now moving into an Adam only view. We're just moving the understanding, we're just keeping the flow going. Futurism to partial preterism to full preterism to covenant creation, it doesn't end there. It goes to Adam only. We got to look and take it one more audience relevancy step further. And that's really what we're doing.
Yes, and because we're going into where the evidence is, and I just wrote a post a couple of days ago on Facebook where I actually found, over 50 verses that's all about Mesopotamia, just in the book of Genesis. I'm not talking about the whole Old Testament, right? And people don't understand the actual setting of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, all of these books, it's in the setting of Mesopotamia. It's not somewhere up in the sky in some Eden, magical garden place. You're talking about in Eridu. You're talking about in the Mesopotamian plain and in the geography and the topology of that region. That is where the Bible begins. So to say that Mesopotamia is not in the Bible, I don't know why you're starting in Mesopotamia. The whole concept of the Bible begins there. That is the Genesis. That is the origin. And I'm going to do some further studying on, like, okay, for the whole Old Testament, how many references to Mesopotamia are there? I bet there is over 1,000.
And if we want to look at the first one to just jump on and smack us in the face, is the fact that the author of Genesis clearly tells us that the Euphrates and the Tigris connected to Eden at some point. That's not a made up place. That's called Iraq. So like we know where it is, and somewhere in that area, that's what they're describing. It's connected to somehow. It was connected to, and now where is Tigris and the Euphrates? What's that area called? Literally, the land between the two rivers, which means what?
Mesopotamia, a Greek word that they actually coined, because it's always the conquerors that coin for that society, not necessarily that society, right? Before that, it was Sumer. It was known as Sumer, but now it was Mesopotamia because the Greeks named that after centuries and centuries and thousands of years later, right? And so we have that in there. The Levant, Canaan, all of that comes past that. Then we have Palestine, and then we have Israel. So when we look at it in a historical perspective, oh my goodness, of course it is in Mesopotamia. And that, I don't know, I think people need to really sit in on that and really soak in on that. Like, my goodness, what am I looking in the Bible for? I get it, like I want something there for me. But before we begin to personalize, let's contextualize the text and say, okay, where is this really happening? Oh my gosh, and really get into that framework of thinking. There were real people here for, thousands of years. This was their worldview. If you really do value the Bible and want to get to what it really is saying, you got to begin to engage with the people of the land.
Yeah, and when we want to push this, we've got to realize. So when Moses was putting this together, and we have to acknowledge. So if we're looking at it from the person, like from the perspective of 3 or 4 generations, let's go 5 generations, 6 generations. Let's go all the way to Jesus, who quotes it. They put Moses as the author of the Torah, of the first 5 books. That's Genesis through Deuteronomy. Now I know that's going to rub a lot of people wrong because there's so many ideas about where Genesis came from, and a lot of people believe that that book is now being added into the 4 books of Moses, and so he's just kind of getting credit for it. But there was like this oral history or a tablet or a lot of theories, but that's not what the people living under the law of Moses would even have cared about. They believed it was Moses. So those issues really aren't the issue. The issue is, what did the people do underneath these rulerships? How are they ruled? How did this actually come in and start working? So that's what I'm looking at when we're looking at Moses. So Moses was credited with the Torah, and that authorship is not being, we're not challenging and saying everybody out there since the 1700s, 1800s who've now through critical, uh, oh darn it, as if I forgot the name of it already.
Textual.
Thank you. Textual criticism. I forgot it when we were chatting a little bit earlier too, so I don't know why it's not on my lips tonight. But textual criticism, a couple 100 years, people are saying, well, maybe not, maybe not. This whole idea that Moses didn't write the Bible, that's actually new. That's a newer idea. So we don't want to rob the time period of that authorship. So I'm not really actually even debating who wrote the Torah. That's not the issue. You can still claim anything you want about who wrote Genesis. What I'm talking about is the people living under the rule of Israel were told that's who wrote it, and that's who quotes it. In fact, Daniel 9:11, one of the most useful scriptures out there talking about this, clearly says, Israel has broken my law, which was laid out by an oath that took place in the law of Moses, and that was in Exodus. And so we're seeing that's the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, which Jesus even quotes in. So there's a lot of conversation we can have around this whole idea. But at the end of the day, the authorship of the people living at the time, it was Moses. And so that's what this position is going to honor. It's not trying to say, well, I've spent, 20 years proving that this theory of where Genesis came from is irrelevant. I'm not engaging in that. What I'm engaging in is, let's put our eyeballs in the eyeballs of the Hebrews who lived under it. So from that position, the author of Genesis was Moses, because that's what those people believed. In fact, it's still today. Judaism today still claims authorship goes to Moses. Christianity still claims authorship goes to Moses. Again, it's not really in question even, except by new liberal scholarship. So the the traditional look at Moses being the author becomes very, very important if the basis of our interpretation is going to be through the eyes of audience relevancy. So
So
I
let
can't stress that enough. If you wanted to, speak to some of
yeah,
that too, Mercy.
I think that as we were talking more and just unpacking, it's so interesting how, we can come together and there's things involved, right? So when you say and you say Moses, I'm thinking, yeah, Moses, right? That's is a traditional point of view. But what I find very interesting, which is very unique, is that you're not focusing on trying to, bring credibility to the authorship of Genesis, which would be Moses. The early church fathers, all of them believed it was Moses. Josephus writes it in his book. He is a Jewish historian. He absolutely downright says it is Moses. All the rabbinical, the Talmud included, the Mishnahs and the Midrashes, they all claim that it was Moses. So obviously, there's a huge traditional. or tradition of the people that received the Tanakh or the Torah, who they believed and who they attribute, their history and who wrote that history and how it was, structured. I believe it, like you were teaching in the Suzerain Vassal Treaty with the five parts of that, that he actually structured it in that way. When we see it in that context, not just that, okay, fine, Moses wrote the Bible. That's not the point. The point is that they believed that tradition. And why did they believe that tradition? Because Moses, what? Wrote it, and he is now establishing it in a certain way to establish what? The legitimacy of who has a right to rule Mesopotamia. It was Israel. And it's a Hebrew narrative, a story where they are now claiming legitimacy to the throne for all the land of Mesopotamia. This is very important. And this is a big part of your Adam only, if I can say it that way, of your perspective of how you are seeing the Bible being told. And we haven't been told this way. Why? Because we've had many distractions to see it in a total another different view. Most especially with all of Christendom prior to the discovery of the cuneiform tablets, in the 1850s, late 1890s, we didn't have ancient Near Eastern culture context at all. So this is very new, and we're fleshing it out, and we're getting closer to what the Old Testament is saying. And because of that, we're honoring that, and we're honoring the tradition that the people that believed in it, how they would have perceived it, how they would have read it, how they would have, listened to it and talked about it and debated it at the synagogue. This is their worldview, and we want to capture that because that's very important to why was the Bible written.
Well, and that's the real big hook here is when it comes to trying to figure out, what is the text talking about? The one of the biggest hooks behind that is, well, who is the author? Because when you find out who the author is, then you can do the follow-up question, well, why did he write it? What was the purpose and reason behind this? Well, when we look at Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, we know what that's. It's the creation of Israel, the new covenant people, and it's not debated by anyone. Like I don't know anyone who would debate that the four books of the Torah are talking about. Or let me say it again: I wouldn't find anyone who would debate that the four books of the Torah are not talking about the creation. So everyone just agrees. Obviously, the Torah is talking about the formation and the creation of the people of Israel. Like to go outside of that is really just arguing, I think, for the sake of arguing. So that is one of those solid, solidified things that nobody debates. It's just like, does the Bible present Jesus to have been crucified? Well, of course it does. Nobody debates that. That's how cut and dry Exodus through Deuteronomy is. It's the creation of the people of Israel. Then why is Genesis in there? See, this is a big problem. This is where it screws up a lot of people. And why is that big to us? Well, that sets the context.
Mm-hmm.
Because here we have Moses. If Moses is the author, well, why did he write it? Well, we just said in Exodus, Moses led the people out of Egypt by the hand of God, brought them to the mountain at Sinai, where he made covenant agreement with them, and they become the covenant people. Why did Moses write this? Because he was recording his people being made the covenant people. But again, why is Genesis in there? That still doesn't answer because that starts at Exodus. Well, then this is why Mercy brought this up, and we're honoring the time. Well, this was recorded in a suzerain vassal treaty. And in order to do so, you must have the historical events laid out that led up to why this people were being included into the covenant. Moses, now we got to see it through their eyes, has led some people out. He brought them to this mountain. He said, God is here, and the mountains thundered. I'm just going off of the narrative of what was written. And he's saying, after coming out, and the mountains thundered, and the power of God was present. God summoned Moses, who went up and said, take these words down to the people. And he brought them down to the people and said, will you do these things? And the people said, yes, we'll do these things. And they became the covenant people. Then Moses writes all this down. In fact, I'm going to a couple scriptures here in Exodus 34:27. The Lord says to Moses, write these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. Leviticus 26:46, it says, these are the statutes and rules and laws that the Lord made between himself and the people of Israel through Moses on Mount Sinai. And in Deuteronomy 31, well, we know we're getting into, let's see, I'm going to quote from 24. When Moses had finished writing the words of the law in a book to the very end, Moses commanded the Levites, take this book of the law and put it by the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it might be there as a witness against you. We understand that this is talking about the creation of the covenant people. And why? Well, that's where Genesis comes in, because the creation of this covenant people goes all the way back to Adam, who was the first empire over the land, who was given dominion over the land. And now Moses is writing this to give Israel, who was just made the covenant people, legitimacy to this claim. How? By claiming Adam was made covenant head over the land, and they're his descendant. It was by the acts that took place to their ancestors when God made covenant with Adam and the ancestor Noah and the ancestor Shem and the ancestor Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. Israel became the covenant people. And that's what Genesis was there for, to explain that historical prologue. So that's why it's very, very important to understand who wrote the Torah. Now, the minds of the people living under that, remember, in their minds, Moses has put this together. It shows why this amazing empire under God with amazing promises, they failed. It passed all the way to them, and now they get to be God's chosen people in the land, raised up above everybody to rule and reign over everyone. And that's what they're being sold. And that's what they believe. And that's why they are marching through the desert for 40 years afterwards, because they believe God is leading Moses and they're being taken to this promised land. Why? Because that's what the law said. That's their agreement.
Mhm.
This is real people under a real agreement believing these things. Now, for those who believe this is all a myth, it doesn't matter. By the time it gets to the people, and when Jesus arrives, they've been living that entire time as though it's real. And all the other cultures around them tell us that they have been living that way as though it was real. So if you're a mythicist or not, it doesn't matter. That's what the story of the Bible says. It's just we're better understanding what this is saying.
Mhm.
And just like Revelation was talking about the end of the people of Israel and their covenant, Moses put together the beginning of their covenant, and Genesis was the historical prologue that justified why God picked them to be the next head in the land.
Mhm. And when we think about their identity formation, when you're in that time frame, you're talking about city states. You're talking about kingdom building, empire building. This had never happened before in the context of what's happening in Mesopotamia, the cradle of life, we say, right? It wasn't the beginning of humanity, but the beginning of a civilization where now they have government, they have commerce, they have trade, they have records now. Before, nothing was written down. It was all oral culture. Now they have records of what's going on and how many grains of rice they have, all of this stuff. So you're creating a civilization. Now, when their identity, when you go into slavery, your identity is lost. When you're taken out of a land that was promised to you. And at the time, we have to remember, folks, Abraham didn't have any land. when he came into Canaan. Remember, he was in Ur, which would have been Babylon, and he's coming down into what, Canaan land. He doesn't have land. He doesn't even have a son. That was the whole issue. Well, now he has a son, Isaac, through promise, through Jacob, and then Jacob becomes Israel. Well, as soon as Joseph goes into Egypt and they have that great famine, you have a whole people that says in the text that, 70 or 72 people from the bloodline of Israel is now in Egypt. Well, what did Abraham receive from God? That they were going to be in slavery for 430 years or 400 years. Well, that's a long time of not being in your land. You're now in slavery in a foreign land of Egypt. You don't have a sense of national identity. You don't have a leader. So Moses comes in, who's been taught under Egypt. He is an Egyptian priest, by the way. He has access to all kinds of literature. He's been educated to the height, right? And he's also what, next in line to be a pharaoh, if you actually unpack all of that he would have been in line of pharaoh. And he has access to all this. He is the perfect man to choose to then say, we're going to give legitimacy and identity for my people, right, that have been in slavery for all of these hundreds of years. Who can do that? Only Moses. And so he's structuring this for Genesis, like you said, as a historical prologue. He has to do that. So he's establishing that. That's very important to know. It's not, not writing Genesis to prove that there's a God, because nobody believed in a God. No, back then everyone believed in a God. Are you crazy? It was like, no, we have over 300 gods in the Mesopotamian pantheon of gods, right? So everyone believed in God. Everyone believed that God created everything, the physical universe. That was hands down no brainer, right? So Moses isn't writing Genesis to prove the things that we think are important to us in a modern context and in modern way of looking at, oh, well, Genesis, it proves God and it proves that, he created everything and Adam is this and that. That's not why Moses is writing it. Once you realize that, your whole theology and your whole focus will shift. And I think you have brought that to the forefront of this discussion and really what is happening here. And that's why it's so significant.
Well, we need to have that context of why was Genesis in there, because if we start at Exodus, well, that's going to change what takes place in Revelation if that's the beginning. Where other views like Israel only, they really start with Abraham and they focus on the physical seed aspect, but it didn't start with Abraham. And so we keep going back, and I think that's, like I said earlier, all we're doing with this is fishing at going, well, it just has to go all the way back to Adam. There's a reason why Adam was in there. And understanding that the Suzerain-Vassal Treaty has requirements. And not only if it didn't have the requirement, if you just read Genesis, it is the historical coming up of how Israel came to be. It actually is that.
Mm-hmm. The
So
birth.
it, absolutely, it's saying from Adam. And when you read it, you can see that it is really, Genesis is really just a big genealogy.
Mm-hmm.
It's just starting from Adam. Why? Because from Adam we get, and this is what it's all about. And people will, what? Blah, blah, blah. This is what it's all about. On day 6, God gave man dominion over the earth and everything that moves on the earth. They have the right to rule the land. They were the highest order in the land. They're the God given rulers to the land of Mesopotamia.
And can I inject
Well,
here? When we think about that ancient world and the customs there, it was all through that bloodline, and it was through heritage by design by the firstborn son. And in that heritage bloodline, you're trying to establish, where does this go, right? And so they have to establish a whole genealogy that fits into, well, this was the son of this son of this son of this son. And in the Suzerain Vassal Treaty, what you have is they're giving that right to that son. I mean, we were just talking about the Rosetta Stone. What was the Rosetta Stone? It was that the prince that was coming on to take the ownership or the right to rule that kingdom. That's why that Rosetta Stone was even written in three languages. The same thing is happening here in the time when writing is forming, and he has to now make it legit. We do that too. If you know anything legal, it's everything's in writing, right? And so he's having to put in writing, how does the kingdom pass from one to the next to the next? Well, it's through this mandate, right? Of Genesis 128, the dominion mandate. Who has the rule to reign and have this kingdom? Well, it's us right here. And let me show you through the genealogy. If you don't have that genealogy, it's totally illegitimate. So, I mean, just take, for example, just recently, of the all of the kingships of Europe, the King of England, the King of Spain. What are they all fighting for? The Habsburg, and all of these bloodlines. They're all fighting for the legitimacy. No, I'm the king. No, I'm the king. Well, look at my birth certificate. Look what bloodline I come from. That's what's happening in Genesis. That's why it's there.
And when we take a look around at the culture that surrounds them, that's what we see. We see Babylon saying, no, we're the legitimate rulers of the land. Egypt saying, no, we're the legitimate rulers of the land. Babylon's like, no, wait a minute, what do you mean Egypt? So all of a sudden these great nations start, and then the Hebrews pop up and they're like, no, we're the legitimate rulers of the land. We're the ones God chose. So they are literally doing what everybody did, and they had to.
Yes, they had to.
They had to claim a God who brought them out, that gave them land, that established them. Otherwise, they're nothing. They're going to have to go and subject themselves to some other land and move on to them and say, will you be our head?
Hmm.
So, and that's where we read many times in the Old Testament, but one of the best is in the covenant agreement itself, where God says, I will make you the head, and no, you will not be underneath as long as you follow the covenant.
Hmm.
And so,
The tail. Yeah,
yeah,
that's head and tail kind
it's a very famous scripture. You will be the head and not the tail,
of.
and that's talking about the leader over the land of Mesopotamia. They have become the inheritors of the headship that Adam once represented, and that's what Moses is actually claiming. Genesis is the succession right from Adam to make Israel the next firstborn son who will inherit this dominion right to rule over the land. You can see it immediately in Genesis 1. Then you can immediately see it given to Noah in Genesis 9, who's allowed to rule over the beasts of the earth. Same exact language. And we see that being given now to Israel. They're the next to inherit the Adam dominion. And that's how God would express his will throughout the land, was through those people.
Hmm.
So, and that's what Moses is claiming. He's saying, we're the next ones in line to be that. God has chosen us above all these other great nations. He didn't choose us because we were the greatest. He chose us because we were the smallest. Well, yeah, they were brand new. They were just born. They're an infant child coming out of Egypt into a land naked. And
Hmm.
so he brought them.
Called my son out of Egypt, right? I called my son out of Egypt. And that's one of the most famous verses of trying to establish, the birth certificate of Israel. And in Exodus, you now see the language shifting from Hebrew to Israel. And later, because Hebrew, they were known as Hebrews in slavery, but then the language starts to change and it continues to say, Moses says, sons of Israel, sons of Israel, sons of Israel, giving them, this is the new head of Adam. We're now being what? Fashioned and molded like how Adam was in, Eden. They're now being fashioned and
Or
molded.
as it says in Isaiah 45, I do believe it's 45, literally, Jacob, I created you, Israel, I formed you, exactly like Adam.
Yes, it's exactly, and now the name is Israel, and because Israel is being formed during the time of Moses, we have the most literature. The rest of the Bible is all about Israel. If this was written at another time, say in the time of Noah, we would have 1,500 years of Noah's history, right? That's just how it would, but it wasn't, right? We're starting with Moses, and that's another indicator of why Genesis there, because it's starting with Moses, and his focus is on the sons of Israel, not the Hebrews. The language is shifting now.
And that's why this is so important. It's not about discluding other people. It's not like this is not saying North America is cut off from the salvation of God. That's saying North America isn't involved in the salvation of God because the salvation of God was concerning the land of Mesopotamia. That's why Adam was originally sent, was the land was in chaos. So God sent the light Adam to bring order back to the land, to rule and reign over them, to subdue, to bring everything back to order. So and God rested under that system. And
Mhm.
so that's the idea that now Israel was saying, we get to be the instrument for God. This isn't about saying Spain isn't included. This isn't about saying Brazil is cut off. This isn't even saying whether they're included or cut off at all. It's actually talking about Moses, who's saying to his people Israel, after he just pulled them out of Egypt, God has done this great thing. God has pulled you out of Egypt to make you the next ruler of the land of Mesopotamia. Why? Because your great granddaddy came from Eden. And they all went, what? Oh, this is awesome. And they had their Lego fun time. And and that's right. Then what happens? Then Moses dies, the Torah ends, Joshua starts. And I agree 100%. Then Joshua to Malachi is literally the times of Israel and their relationship with God during their time as head over the land of Mesopotamia. Sometimes they were obedient, and during that time they got the blessings, and other times they were disobedient, where they were cursed and punished. But their time was from Moses to Jesus. They had their time, just like Adam had his time from Adam to Noah. He had his time. But together, that is one covenant agreement with Adam,
Wonderful. Mm-hmm.
one people. Absolutely. It's a family. Adam,
Mm-hmm.
Adam's descendants, whose descendants became the final descendant.
Mm-hmm.
And thus the beginning, as it says in Revelation, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. So that was it. That was There was the first Adam and there was the last Adam. And the time period of the rulership over the land of Mesopotamia came to an end. So this is talking about Mesopotamia from start to finish and the ruling system that God established over that land for that time period. But that's a snapshot in time. That time period ended. Why? Because we don't want to be under temple rulership. That time period was for a time of human time. That was an age we went through, and it was an age that needed to be left behind. And
And
so what
this, just real quick here, Dallas, we can sort of eliminate like this offensiveness of, well, I needed to be included in this. Well, again, let's go back to the purpose of why the Bible was being written. This isn't about exclusion, okay? This is, we're trying to get closer to the Bible, and we're trying to get closer to, okay, who were the authors and who were the audience. So if this is a story about them, we need to meet them at their story. Constantly injecting, well, what about, the Romans, what about the Chinese, what, like, that is an irrelevant question. Again, it's like, somebody, having their history time, and they wrote a book about an autobiography about their life. It's really silly for someone then to grab that book and read it and say, well, what about me? Why am I not in here? Like, nobody would ever do that, because that's a, an autobiography of, say, like, the family of the Ford family, and then someone else coming in saying, well, why is not my, family representing there? I'm from the Chrysler family or whatever, and it's like, what why are you even asking that question? That's, it shouldn't even be a question that you ask. If you understood, this is nothing to do with you or not with you. We're just trying to get to the biblical text. And people have a very hard time with that. But that's what we say that we're all trying to do here. We're not, tapping into some denominational, doctrinal, line that we can't cross over. No, we're saying, what is the Bible saying? And we're just stating the facts of what's there in the Bible. It's an autobiography of the Hebrew origins, not human origins. It's an autobiography of the Semitic bloodline that began in Sumer in Mesopotamia. That's just simply what it is. And we're unpacking that. And it's an amazing story.
And what we need to do too is recognize that, again, that context. Why is it so important? Well, what is the law covenant? It is the 5 books of Moses. So it is the Torah. It is the law that govern these people. It's their constitution. Let's just change the word a little bit.
Mm.
So if we go into the US, the United States Constitution, as great as people want to say it is, however you want to say it doesn't govern anybody living in Russia, China, Australia, Brazil, Canada. It doesn't govern anyone except the citizens under its jurisdiction. It doesn't have the right to go into another nation and expect that. So, for example, in the US, it might be a law that says if you go through a red light, you're going to be ticketed. That breaks our law. Well, if somebody in China drives through a red light, no policeman from the States can arrest him, charge him, or give him a ticket or fine him or do anything because he's not an American citizen and he's not under that law. He's not under that rule. And we can't do that with Israel. When Moses put the Torah together, that was their constitution. Sure, in the States, I guarantee you they have sections in their constitution and their subsequent laws that fill out their concerns about how to deal with other nations and how to deal with other nations who want to befriend them. Absolutely, they have tons of information about foreign affairs. But that's not how they control foreigners. They can't, it doesn't mean they can go into another country and tell the foreigners how they have to act. So that's what we're doing when we're putting ourselves into the Bible. We're taking away the fact that Moses created a constitution for Israel, and they were under that constitution because they were that country, and that country had to follow their laws, and that law was only for their country. In
And if
fact,
you broke it, you were in sin. This is the context of sin. We did a video prior to this about sin. This is the context. It's not talking about bad things and immoral things and thinking things and all of this stuff that we do in our modern context. It's looking at what they were going through and that they were in sin if they broke their what constitution, their stipulations as written in the Suzerain Vassal Treaty.
and so when we want to, again, this goes back to the whole point of focusing on in this chat, Adam only, and its context and its desire is to bring in this perspective and context of audience relevancy. Call it extreme audience relevancy because that's what we need. We're so focused on us and our issues, which is that I don't want to die and go to some place where God isn't. We all have a desire to whatever it is that we're reading. But what we need to do is be as truthful with it as we can. And if God took us from futurism to partial preterism, but full preterism was true, why did he bring us to partial preterism? Why does partial preterism exist? Because we need stepping stones.
Mhm.
Why does full preterism exist without covenant creation understanding? If covenant creation is true in a movement of God. Why? Because we need the steps to get there.
Mm.
Israel was a step. Adam was a step. And together over that time period, they were a step in human evolution. So this is not us trying to say people don't count today or people didn't count. In fact, it's the exact opposite. This has become a message to help everybody. That doesn't mean everybody wants in or out, but that's where the universalization of the message comes in. It's not us under the law looking for Jesus. That's not us. That was Israel. We don't have those restrictions. That's what's so awesome about the story is because of what God proved in Jesus, we don't have any of those restrictions. We can come to God. And that was the purpose. There was a stepping stone needed for humanity to come out of the darkness that we were walking in universally, trying to create our own gods. So God, in his mercy, came into the world and brought in through civilization the knowledge of a people into knowing God through spirit and truth with no restriction. That message was God solidifying for the whole of humanity, for anyone that they could come into contact with him, and they didn't need any of that nonsense.
Mm.
That can't be more pro Bible and Yahweh for humans than anything. And what's also interesting is it's pro human with Yahweh before Adam, because
Mhm.
that means all the humans before Adam, God wanted that truthful relationship with. But it was through the darkness and the unknowing of man's heart and the wickedness of his heart to say that I'm the center and that I need to do something. And then if I'm good enough, then God will come to me. So we made ourselves the center. And in that darkness, God saved all of humanity in a way through Adam. How? By telling them about the light. So God always wanted this for humans, well before Adam was ever created. So if you believe in millions of years or if you believe in thousands of years, it doesn't matter. It's the same image. These people that God created didn't know God in that land, and it was chaos, it was destruction, it was war. So God raised up a people to rule over that land and restore it with order and peace. God did that because he loved the land, not because he hated it. So that means God loved every one of those people before Adam.
Mhm.
That's why he made Adam. That's the message of God's character. That's what was revealed in the Bible, was that God's heart is for man regardless of his position. Even under the law, God was still for man. It didn't matter if it was Adam or outside of Adam. That wasn't even a question. And now after Adam, God's heart is for man, everywhere. So all humans have a purpose in this story. There was the humans before, there was the humans during, and now we're the humans after.
Mhm.
But the story is for all of those humans. Why did Adam start? Because humans were suffering. Was the point of Adam? To stop suffering. Now, what's the point of Adam's story for us now? To stop suffering.
Mhm.
It's God's heart. That's his character, is to bring an end to suffering. How? Through the light of the knowledge of the experience of knowing God while you're alive here. So Adam only isn't about getting rid of God or atheism or universalism. It's about getting back to what did the Hebrews see in the Bible? Why? Because God's character was revealed apart from the law.
Mhm.
And that's why he told us that in the people of Adam, so that we can now, who are apart from the law, forever have relationship with him. Why? Because it's his character to do so. And so this isn't about taking Jesus and throwing him away or taking the Bible and throwing it away. That's not what this conclusion is coming to. This conclusion is coming to the greatest exaltation of the word of God that I've ever seen or heard. This word goes all the way back to people that we can't even know that were created, to Adam, to all the people who will ever be created. This one message applies, that God created all humans in this place so that we all have a chance to exist with God.
Mhm.
Isn't that amazing? And it's us that keeps getting in the way. And that's why the Bible's here, is so that we stop giving ourselves working blocks that cause us to stumble and say, I need to do these things. Then afterwards, God will love me. That's why it's here. How could that ever become unimportant?
And also, Dallas, when when I started to meet with you and talk with you, and it was really beautiful how you always elevate Jesus, the name above every name. And that Jesus, my goodness, we follow Jesus because he was the door to God. He showed us frail humanity. How do we get to God? And what did he tell the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4? You think we have to worship God in this mountain and, over there in Jerusalem. And what does he say? No, we only need to worship him in spirit and in truth. That was that was like revolutionary thinking at that time. But that is a universal, like, golden rule, worshiping God, spirit and truth. And Jesus embodied that. He recognized that. He was aware that. He knew that. And he was an example, the light, like Adam was a light, but he was a light to show us how to get to God in that framework. And so that type will never leave. And so your elevation of Jesus is very, very beautiful. It's critical to me because, I'm a follower of Jesus. Uh, and so we're not excluding Jesus, even though he ended the whole covenantal system. We don't want to be under a treaty. We don't want to be under a national treaty. We don't want to be under those laws. We are now what? Under a relationship, like how it always should have been. We're under a relationship, and Jesus showed us the way.
What's also neat too is when we understand that God never leaves us hanging. So in Genesis 5, after God created Adam, he gave him a name. He called him man. And that was so that all the followers had a name in which they could call upon God. We see this also all the way through the Bible. We see with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why did they call upon the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Because those were the heads that gave them that right, and they knew who the identity of that God was. They didn't know Yahweh. They didn't know a name. They didn't know, even if they did, it wouldn't matter. They're saying, I'm calling upon the name. They're saying, I'm calling upon the God of that guy over there because I saw what that God for that guy did. So it's when we
It's
look at
Oh my gosh, when I first heard that from you, that's just absolutely mind blowing. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I'm calling upon, and how Seth, was, and Enosh was calling upon the name of the Lord. What did that mean? That was associated with a group of people, because it's the
and
people that reflect the light of God here on earth. We forget that sometimes.
well, we also see what's interesting about the naming is we get that with Adam, who was the head. Abraham gets a new name, all these kind of things. But specifically Jacob, Jacob gets called Israel. So we have Adam, whose descendants get called man. Then we have Jacob, whose descendants get called Israel. But each time they were given a new name, it was so that they had that covenant identity. And now that's really important for us today. Not necessarily that we have to hang on to anything, but what was neat was with Jesus, there was a promise that said, I will give you a new name. And
Mm.
of course, that's talking about the Israelites who were looking for restitution and reconciliation before the day of wrath. So Jesus was given as a name that they could call upon. So Jesus replaced Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They no longer wanted to call upon the God of Moses. They wanted to call upon the God of Jesus.
Mhm.
Now, why is that interesting for us if that's only referring to the covenant Mesopotamian people of Adam? Because of these extra words that are applied to it. The name of Jesus was the name given above all names, not just in this age, but in the age to come and for all ages. Because it's actually interesting because it's the word age of ages. So we're going to go through age after age after age after age after the end of Adam, but the name Jesus will always be there for people to call upon to meet with God. Not because you're Israelite, not because you're following a law, but because we need a name to call upon. And who do we call upon? The God
Ghostbusters.
of
No,
Ghostbusters.
sorry.
We call upon the name of the God of Jesus. I'm not joining a religion when I say that. I'm not taking on rules when I say that. I'm not saying I'm a Christian. I'm not saying anything. I'm saying the God that was with Adam, the God that went to Noah, the God that went to Abraham, the God that went to Isaac, Jacob, the God that went to Israel, the God that went to Jesus. That's the God I'm praying to. It's
Mhm.
just identity. Who to identify with? The God that did all that for Mesopotamia. Why? Because if he could do that for Mesopotamia, what can he do in my life?
Hmm.
The
Right.
God of Mesopotamia is not trying to make you Mesopotamia.
Mhm.
The God of Mesopotamia is the God of all creation. We're not all going back under Mesopotamian law, but we're all now made aware because of the Mesopotamian law and what God did with them, how
And
we have free access.
what they went through, we don't need to repeat. That's
Yes, exactly.
great that it's recorded, it's finally recorded. At any generation, at any time, at any culture, they can look at that and say, oh my gosh, we don't need to go through that to learn that God is with us and that God has accepted us. Oh, why? Well, because Jesus showed us the way. That's the transference there. That's why the Bible is so important. We actually have a living record there to say we don't ever want to go under that system. That we had a people group that went through that whole system. Look at what happened. Oh my goodness, we can bypass all that and just what? Trust in the Father. Just trust him.
And I think that's where it becomes the difficulty with what I'm saying as we wrap things up here. The reality of the difficulty isn't I'm taking out Jesus or I'm making God, insignificant to just a local land deity. None of these things. The issue is I'm not following the standard Christian ideas. That's the issue. At the end of the day, that's what's the big problems. But if you stop and look at where I'm coming from and the things that I'm saying and things that I've taught and learned, and again, I'm openly saying, go and look at my first videos on this channel and look at the progress and this tough things that had to be faced. And there's some videos that I look back and I have to, oh, I can't believe I made that video. But I had to go through these things. And that's what we have to do. We have to go through this muck. Just like when we went from futurism to partial preterism to preterism, even then into covenant creation, it's just muck. And we have to go through it and we have to clear it out because there's too many matzo balls left floating out here that have to be dealt with, that none of these views are dealing with it. So call my view, call my understanding, call my conclusions Adam only if you want. I don't know what else to call it, but there's no doubt that what I have found is biblical, it's historical, is audience relevance focused, and that's the focus that's the whole purpose behind what it is that has driven me to these conclusions. And as these talks keep going, hopefully we can get more of this kind of stuff out of the way because I'd like to move into what are some of the how should we see these things, maybe how should we take on where are we now and move into these. But unfortunately, what we first need to do is really solidify why was the Bible written, because that is such an interesting thing here. Before I hand it over to you, Mercy, fundamentally I don't know anyone who talks about that topic, and it's interesting because without it there's no way you'll come to a rational conclusion.
Hmm. Yeah. And with all of the things that you listed there in what your view contains and the distinctions, between the other views, I just want to, share with the audience here that I think another element here that we can look at is the fruit. Is the fruit is the what is the pudding in the what is the evidence in the pudding? I don't know. Um,
Oh,
but
the
that
proof's in the pudding.
proofs in the pudding, right? Taste and see that the fruit is good, right? Taste and see that the Lord is good. I think that all of the people that's on your Discord channel, and some of them, I haven't met in person, but we have engaged, and I see that people have been set free from the limitations of religion and fear-based theology that really wrecks a real living relationship with God. And when I see their lives and the testimony that they have, and really what it's done for me too, um understanding Adam only, and and me asking like all these questions, um the fruit is there where it has literally changed our lives for the better, and it's getting better and better. And so I just want to give that testimony to your audience, and that it's absolutely there, and you can't deny that when people actually share their testimony of how incredibly freeing Adam only has been, and it's actually brought me closer to the Lord, and really even just understanding what the Bible is saying. And that's been very critical for me and important to me. So I just wanted to share that with your audience.
That's fantastic because I think at the end of the day, that is what this is all about. I was once asked, and I kind of thought about it. And now I just, I was, why this? Why is it? At the end of the day, it's like, if what you're doing isn't making your life better, then why are you doing it? And so, to everybody, we're all struggling. We're all trying to figure these things out. And that's one thing that I can definitely say was when I went from futurism to partial preterism, my life got better. When I went from partial preterism to full preterism, my life got better. When I went from full preterism to covenant creation, my life got better. And when I finally went all the way to Adam only, my life's getting incredibly better. And that's the big thing for me is how much stuff is just like if you go from futurism to full preterism, it's a night and day world.
Hmm.
Moving forward and letting that stuff drop off, the fear, the judgment, the worry, all these different ideas. And as much as people say they have 100% confidence in God, that's just not being truthful. And so the reality of our lives when we went from futurism to preterism, well, what I'm saying is that key that revelation continues as we go deeper. If we're willing to step past those stalling points, preterism and all they're all steps. We got to keep going. There's a movement happening, and no one's denying that there's a revelation happening. There's a maturing. We're at a turning point. God's turning the dial of information up a little bit. And we are seeing these things and they're not being dealt with fully. And that's where this has moved forward is I think that's all that's happening is just moving it forward, just being consistent all the way through as much as we can. And I'm not pretending that we understand everything or could be. In fact, I'm excited to see where someone's going to be able to take what I'm learning because I'm starting to be like, okay, this is what I'm seeing, a lot of things filling out. And so I'm like, great, but I'm still just limited to what I can see. I can't wait. Like how even Mercy has helped expand things and Leaf and these guys like that have been with me for a while, and we just keep seeing it just doesn't stop. Preterism isn't it's over. Let's just keep reading Ephesians and arguing about Thessalonians and Matthew 24. It's not what life is about. And that's why this has continued forward. I don't think I'm better than anyone. I don't think I've found something more important than anyone. It's the next step. And it's just being truthful. It's just being honest, not calling anybody names. It's great honor to have been brought into the revelation of preterism. It was a great honor to be brought into the revelation of covenant creation, and I can't say it without any greater it's the greatest honor so far is to be had all this other stuff drop off when we move into Adam only. So
Hmm.
it's not trying to pitch you. It's just Mercy got me all gushy. So I'm saying, yeah, me too. My life has changed massively for the better. And I think at the end of the day, that's the most relevant point. And I think you did a really good job of bringing that up to highlight because at the end of the day, even if I'm wrong, right, wrong, we have that freedom to try to figure this out. And, at the end of the day, it's trusting God. We trust in God to make it happen.
And let me also say here, and maybe we can close with this, is that nobody can take your relationship away from God. No person, no priest, no pastor, no denomination, no doctrine, no new thing. And so, if you can just take that fear out, your relationship with God is intact. If you actually have one and you understand God and He talks to you, there's no belief system that can take that away. So, when you take that fear out, what do you have? You still have your relationship with God. So, there's no fear factor here. If anything, it's actually coming closer to the biblical text that hopefully can free you.
Absolutely. What's the perfect love casts out all fear and all those cheesy scriptures we all know that should come flooding to our minds.
Not cheesy. That's a real good one. You want to keep.
But at the end of the day, that's the truth. That we can joke around and stuff, but that's what it's all about. And that's what this journey's been. So as we keep expressing ourselves and keep this digging up, Hopefully, you guys find it as interesting. I've been contacted a couple times now, and we see other people are seeing the truth in this. It's freeing people from, from my view, helping people out of Israel only because they don't know what else to do with the completion aspect, and there's not too many options. There's atheism, maybe universe. I don't know what to do with it. So this to me is very important because not only is it answering a lot of these other questions, it's doing so in a fulfilling way where, and I hate to bring it down to this, but at some point there is a intuition and we feel this is right and we feel this is wrong. The reason why I hate saying that is because that's not the way to judge things. We should be judging things on the feelings, but there is a, when you feel like this is right, that's also reinforcing with it. So there's my little magical spiritual add in at the end, is it also feels right, is all I'm trying to say. So not only does it look right, not only do the A, B's, and C's look right, not only does it add up, but at the end of the day, it feels right as well. So awesome. Thank you very much, Mercy, for helping us battle this topic around. I'm not sure what we'll do next week, but I'm excited to do it because I think these conversations are important and others are enjoying it. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Perfect. And I just want to say to everyone listening, you made it all the way through. I hope you enjoyed it and look forward to the next talk. Bye bye.